Shalom. So I am here with one of the most interesting people on earth. I'm not joking about that. Bur- uh, on the
All right,
Discord
all
server,
right, I'll take it.
um, on the Discord server, I've been bragging about having you on my channel, and you are probably right after Paul Vanderklay, the most popular person on the server, I would say. Um,
Okay.
so I'm not going to give an introduction. Anybody who isn't watching your channel, big mistake. Byrne
Yeah,
has
well, I suspect that the people you get are going to be largely Paul people,
yeah
well, your people and my people.
yeah
And there's a lot of overlap, I'm guessing. So
yeah.
they should probably have some idea. Hell,
The one thing I will say is Byrne also has a channel on Georgia, which is
not
absolutely fascinating.
the US state, not the
Right,
US state.
the country Georgia. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Next week, we're talking about Macon, and we're going to do like a little side tour and talk about REM in Athens at some point, maybe the B 52s. No, not that, Georgia.
Yes, the former Soviet Republic. Not, and they are not Russian. That's really important to remember.
Very important that it's the former. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Right now, it's like there was a diplomat who came here who had said he was Russian, and he had said he didn't think the Abkhazia region should be integrated back into Georgia. He thought it wouldn't ever happen. But he came here for his birthday, and then the Georgians found out they were here, and they busted him, and they basically, he was after hours at our curfew, and but then they also fined the restaurant that was serving him like 10,000 lari, which is about a little over $3,000. So it was pretty funny.
Wow.
Yeah, no, Russia here is definitely not something you know, they don't mind Russians.
Right.
They just mind Russia.
Right. So I'm actually Persian,
Yeah, I
Kurdish
was going to
Persian.
guess that you were like, I was going to guess which Jewish branch you were. Your name is so hard to find. I figured it probably exists more in another script. And so I was going to guess a Mizrahi Jew as opposed to Sephardim. So,
You know a lot more than the vast majority of Jews about Judaism, sir. Um,
well, I did spend 16 years in New York City, which kind of makes me honorary in some senses. I remember I used to walk into Jewish bookstores looking for books because I'm always just looking for books. And I would walk in and they say, "Are you Jewish?" And I go like, "No, is that okay?" I go, "Yeah." And one great book I found was Humor in the Holocaust. You would never find this book anywhere else. So yeah, and you know, I had plenty of friends who were Jewish, and it was. I've always appreciated the Jewish perspective on things, even when I disagree. I find Jewish people are great to disagree with. You know, even when I was young in the San Francisco Bay Area, I remember having this one. I had just become a Christian at the age of 15 through the Jesus movement, and there was this guy Mark Borsick who was going to my high school. And I remember we would have these conversations. And one point, Mark says to me, "Well, you know, animals have a soul too." And I was sitting there saying, like, "No." And then he brings it in. He shows me the word. Uh, he shows me animals and then the word nephesh next to it. And he goes, I said, "Okay, I concede."
yeah, yeah. Well, we could go off on all kinds of tangents. The
Well,
main reason why I invited Byrne is because he made an absolutely awesome video on Gnosticism, and I highly recommend it. It's the first video, honestly, that I would say provides a good introduction to Gnosticism, and it refers to another video by Benjamin Boyce, which was absolutely great. with Bruno, I will not butcher
Shoat.
his name.
Shoat.
Uh, Shoat.
I butchered it in the video, but it is Shoat. So
But I mean, Gnosticism keeps on coming up, and
yeah.
one thing we were discussing on the server a lot is people somewhat use that term as a pejorative without
Hmm.
really having a definition, right?
Right.
And they may actually be talking about mysticism, they may be talking about occultism, they may be talking about um, you know, a lot of different things, and they don't necessarily say what they dislike about about Gnosticism. They just say it's Gnostic and that's a heresy and therefore it's bad, but
Right.
there's they don't say what they want. They
Well,
are,
well,
yeah,
I
cool.
think part of it is that people really don't understand what it is very well, and they do tend to lump a lot of things together. And there are connections, but it's never as simple as, you know, 1 and 1 equals 2. Especially with dealing with Gnosticism, it's all really complex. And sometimes I wonder, you know, it's like whether it's Platonic philosophy, even I'm kind of like sitting there weighing like Jonathan Peugeot's whole symbolic thing, wondering, you know, where do some of these ideas come from? Not that I'm saying they're Gnostic, but I'm just simply saying these things are more complicated than they seem.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is there's so much nuance and people have so little background that
Hmm. Hmm.
we don't even have a vocabulary to speak about what we're actually criticizing.
Right.
Um, I found this quote, and you might appreciate the person who said it, but I thought it really speaks to the problem here. Um, a solitary ascetic is a symbol of the most cowardly egotism. A
Hmm.
hermit who flees from his brothers instead of helping them to carry the burden of life, to work for others, and to put their shoulders to the wheel of social life, is a coward who hides himself when the battle is on and goes to sleep drunk on an opiate. Can you guess
Who said
who said
that?
that?
Some ancient church father?
H.P. Blavatsky.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I had no idea who she was. Apparently, she's the grandmother of all New Age movements. I
Well,
found a
she's
quote.
also the grandmother of, she's the one who applied Aryan to what she called the root races. She actually had these visions about the Himalayas where, and in a sense, she was indeed connecting with, and later she actually did connect with uh, the Himalayan forms of Buddhism. But her own idea was this, and I think it's taking the Hindu idea of caste and created these. I think she called them 12 root races. I wonder why 12, huh? And but of course we know who was on the bottom, and she was Gnostic enough. I don't believe the Aryans were on the top.
No,
Uh,
I don't think so. But honestly,
No, she had like Atlanteans or something like that, you know, some past race that left their seed behind in the Aryans.
right. Yeah, and so a lot of people were surprised at the connection between the Nazis and Gnosticism and occultism in general, which is kind of,
Just a minute.
yeah.
But then I
Okay, I
realized our
restarted.
time differences are weird. So go ahead.
Yeah, so which I mean, obviously, not obviously, but anybody who knows their history knows, you know, that there was definitely an occult nature to Nazi ideology. Um, but I really want to drill down into what is offensive and wrong in Gnosticism.
Mhm.
Obviously, this idea of, especially the demon seed, right, of trying to find uh, people who are descended spiritually from demons and angel, or that has kind of, it is kind of part of Gnosticism, and
Mhm.
obviously that I think that is very anti-Christian and anti-Hebrew, right?
Right. I think the angel idea
Mhm.
is okay, but the problem is once you get into uh, these multiple angels, and in Gnosticism they tend to function as demiurges, taking you up and down. In some forms of Gnosticism, they had 365 layers from the top to the bottom,
Right.
and they always, you know, the Jews tended to be near the bottom, and humanity was always near the bottom, and so yeah, but
And well, yes. So there's also that whole hierarchy. Although I don't have as much problem with a sort of, I have a problem with placing different people at different points in the hierarchy based on, oh, well, this is, if you are born such a person, you're a good person, and if you were born to such a person, then you're a bad person, right? I,
right.
I think I think that's part of what's wrong with Gnosticism. Um,
Well, that I think what it is it's the application. It's, the thing about Gnosticism is this quest for secret knowledge takes it into every sphere it can possibly fill. So when Blavatsky, for instance, goes looks into Eastern thinking, she takes the notion of caste. Now, Benjamin Boyce did an interview with an Indian woman. I forget her name, but absolutely, it was within the last month, but absolutely amazing discussion. I mean, she was a hardcore feminist. I didn't agree with her on everything, but she talked about the nature of the caste system as it is in India today. And even though technically it's not supposed to, there's supposed to be equality in India, in practice there isn't any. That is to say that these rigid, so if a person is born of a lower caste, is that's just who they are forever, and they can't even lick the shoes of like a Brahmin caste or something like that.
yeah.
And she took that idea and then stuffed it through these other occultic processes, because she's coming out of a whole other thing as well. I mean, what she's doing is she's taking the Eastern thought, but prior to that, she is a spiritualist. And the spiritualist comes out of, it's well, part scam. There were the Fox sisters in upstate New York who started doing these things with the rattling and stuff. What they had done was figured out some really clever magic tricks. I think it was the Davenport brothers who also did the same things, where they would, say, here behind this curtain, this guy is tied up, and then they open the curtain, and you close the curtain and you hear all this noise and stuff, and then open the curtain and the guy's still tied up. Well, they'd figured these things out first, how to put little bells on their toes and stuff. So there was this scam thing. One of the Fox sisters eventually, I mean, they were teenagers when they did this, but this took hold in this really, it's called the burned over area of New York when it comes to religious revivals, upstate New York. They started this, and did I not do that? Okay. They started this, and then what happened was uh, they were, one of the sisters confessed to it, that it was all a scam, but the spiritualist movement had already gone on, and by that time it had gone to Blavatsky, and it had meshed with things like mesmerism and these things from the late 18th century, and which go back then into eventually into things like alchemy and stuff like that. So it's
Well,
quite
so there's two problems there. One of superstition, and the other problem is, I guess charlatanism. Just
right.
outright fraud, and
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 she
then
was.
Yeah, and then there's also the problem of trying to, of magic, which is another thing we've been talking a lot about on the Discord server. This
Mhm.
this idea of God as vending machine,
Right,
and access to divinity as a way uh, of getting what you want, right?
right, right.
Controlling the world.
Yeah, I think that America is particularly rife with this sort of vending machine God, because we tend to think that uh, we have, profit theology. And by profit, I don't mean, the prophets of old. I mean, making money profit. And we have theologies in America which say, if you believe in God, God will bless you and give you money, you know. But even your standard believer tends to think, I mean, my mom, bless her heart, she's gone now, but she used to think if we got a parking space, it was God's doing, you know? And it's like, I mean, that sounds really innocent, but unfortunately, those kind of things, and I did see this with her, they let you down in the end, because that's not really what life is like.
Right.
You got fortunate, you got a parking place, or you made money, but making money by itself doesn't mean anything good necessarily.
So I have to do a bit of clarification here because theologically, I think there is an important distinction to be made between what's called in Hebrew hashgacha pratit, the idea of divine providence, that God controls everything,
Right.
and the idea that, and people do confuse the two, and the
Yes.
idea that because God creates everything, then good people will have good things happen to them. And
Hmm.
if you are Job's friends telling
Exactly.
him you have to be evil in order to have bad things happen to you, then I mean you're going against a core Judeo-Christian belief.
Yes, absolutely. And yet, I think America, just given its history, has been kind of rife with that. I think it started off on a better note with the Puritans. Actually, they believed that if you were hardworking and thrifty, God would bless you. And there's a certain kind of logic to that, because you've saved your money, you've been wise with your expenses and such like that. However, by the time you get to this kind of the hodgepodge of the present, that same idea has mutated several times over and has taken on this other quality, which is unfortunately a very American characteristic, although we've managed to export it around the world too. So,
Right. What I did want to go back to the quote, though, about asceticism and this cowardice, this attempt to really run away from the world. Because,
mhm,
another thing we've been talking about on the server is the fear of sexual maturity that seems to have
mhm, mhm.
gripped the entirety of the United States, right? Especially, it's kind of funny that the left, which was known for being free love and sex, has become again kind of Puritan in its
Yeah.
in its anti-sex, you know, yeah.
Well, yeah, but very oddly though, that is, there are certain things which are great and other things which we don't talk about. So it's very strange. So
I think,
what were you thinking in relationship to the ascetic idea?
well, I do think there is this attempt to try to escape from the physical world and its suffering and its what it is, and we people are trying to escape into their ideologies and onto online and into a sort of Gnosticism. I think, for example, the idea of menstruation is really, really scary for both men and women and boys and girls. And
Hmm.
so it makes a lot more sense to me when you realize that now we have this craze of putting little girls on puberty blockers, right?
Right.
To try to escape that sort of sexual maturation, that becoming an adult. And it seems like there is people are fleeing from reality
Hmm.
into
Hmm.
some sort of Gnosticism, and that actually seems to be the worst part of Gnosticism to me.
Did you watch my 21st Century Cargo Cults?
Yes. Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, because that's where I really kind of spell out. I think there's a connection here, and you're absolutely right, between the juvenilization of America and this weird thing that's happened over the years where, I'm 65 years old right now. When I was young, I was, at the age of 20, 21, it was not uncommon for people to get married. It was not uncommon to leave your house and to go start working. I was certainly expected to. And so there was this idea that you were supposed to mature. And this went into a lot of different areas, including intellectually, creatively. You were supposed to find a job. I mean, when I was young, you still had the idea that you find your career and stick with it the rest of your life. This would, by the 1980s, this idea would pretty much disappear. But I remember looking for work when I was around 21 or so, desperate to try to figure out what I would do for the rest of my life, and knowing that I didn't really know yet. But I think now people who are 33 years old think the same thing.
have,
Now you have, I mean, I know 50-year-olds who are essentially still children,
have
you
have
know.
have you seen the statistics on teenage sex and pregnancy?
Not recently. What have you seen?
So teenagers are not having sex,
Right. I know about this. Yes.
and it's like, um, in a sense, I'm happy about it. We certainly thought of it as a problem, and obviously, I believe in the sanctity of marriage and all of that, but just the idea that even teenagers are no longer sexual. That's that's kind of frightening.
It is very strange. But and if you remember from Benjamin Boyce's conversation with Bruno Shoat, he talks about the anti-procreation nature of a certain kind of Gnosticism. And that is to say that, and I pointed it out with the Russian cults, especially the Skopsi. But you see the same thing with so much of the trans movement. You see it in just this eternal kind of youth. Now, what people will say is, well, people are living longer these days. Well, there's one big problem with that. People may be living longer, but women, pretty much by 40, you're in trouble. You're not going to have children pretty much after that. So women today are encouraging each other to go for the career, sleep around and freeze your eggs. just, just it's crazy stuff. But that's where we are. And in a sense, there is this, you see, one of the things that I've been thinking about is this problem of identity, that people don't know who they are. And the more you think about it, it's just like, what do you mean you don't know who you are? Oh, you've lost yourself. You can't, well, I'm looking for myself. It's just like, where am I? It's like, I don't find myself. And yet you know exactly where you are. I'm sitting right here. Now, of course, I'm putting a certain part of myself into the internet and it's coming up to you. But, intellectually, I can say to myself, okay, I understand what I'm doing. This is not the same as a face-to-face conversation. This is something else. It's interesting, but it is different. And I think that the issues of identity go straight back to this weird Gnostic impulse that's been growing. I mean, I see it in Jung, I see it in the New Age movement, I see it in the hippies, but I also see it in the women's movement, I see it in the LGBT movement, I see it in certainly in the anti-racist movement. What is identity? It's just become this very strange thing. one thing I've realized over my life is when everybody is talking about one specific idea, that idea is about to be lost.
What do you mean?
So when people were talking about love over and over in the 60s, you know, it's like when Joan Baez was singing about love at the beginning of the 60s, it's like, you know, how to love each other and such. By the time Janis Joplin is singing about love at the end of the 60s, she's just talking about, you know, you just love anybody, man. And she means sex. You know, when Stephen Stills is singing Love the One You're With, what do the Beatles mean by all you need is love? I don't know. But as Larry Norman, the songwriter, wrote, the Beatles sang all you need is love, and then they broke up. So love was this big topic. Now people say love is love, to which I'm sitting there going like, and that means exactly what? What are the definitions of those words? Does it mean sex is sex or attraction is attraction? What does it mean? I don't know. Nobody knows actually. But I
Well,
think part of it is if you go back in time, there are problems with the size of our culture, just purely the size. So I think it was Os Guinness pointed this out, that the average person in the Middle Ages saw the average person in the Middle Ages living in a village saw fewer people in their lifetime than we might meet or we might see walking down a busy street in New York City or San Francisco on a day. So back when people lived in small, even the cities were much smaller. Back when people lived in smaller situations, you knew who you were to everyone you met, and everybody kind of knew who you were. So people weren't asking themselves questions about, I wonder who I am, because everyone knows, oh, you're the crazy daughter of the baker who, you know, has these ideas, or you're the guy who rode his horse 500 miles for his mother or something, you know, whatever. You knew who these people were. You had a pretty good sense of their character. Whereas today, it's all about the mask, the persona. And of course, this whole internet thing has added another layer.
right.
And so there's
Anonymity.
something very Gnostic in that. Gnostic meaning we're not connected to the roots anymore. We're not, you know, part of it is, and with our avatars on games and video and, you know, the various things people have come up with to name themselves, we are suddenly in this weird zone where, you know, is Sargon of Akkad or is he Carl Benjamin? I saw someone interviewing him recently and they were saying, I just can't call you anything but Sargon of Akkad, you know, and that's a name, of course, he gave himself in video gaming. And there's lots of people like that. Is PewDiePie or is he Felix Schellberg? You know, who are we? And so now we're in a situation where we don't know, because we don't know for a host of reasons. I think the Gnostic impulse is one of them, but it's also technology, it's size, it's the fact that all of these things can be commodified, so that it's hard to find stability. It's hard to find reality.
Right.
So,
So, I mean, you talked about anti-natalism, this idea of, okay, let's not have children, but that also, we seem to have started really into this whole euthanasia thing, where, okay, if you're suffering enough, we should release you from this world and your suffering, right? And also, that one Gnostic element which really screams out recently to me is the capacity to redefine not just people, but words and things, and just the fluidity of meaning, the fluid and meaning as in dictionary, right? As of definition. And that seems to be very Gnostic to me.
mm-hmm.
And
Explain yourself a little more.
I'm just wondering, is it fluidity that is the problem here?
I think, yeah, there is some problem there. You know, the problem is that people can conjure up variations on themselves or who they think they really are. But as I've learned, I remember I was just talking with a friend of mine today, and I said, the first time I went to London and Europe in 1978, I had this idea. I said, nobody here knows me. I could pretend to be someone I'm not. And if I really had put some work into it prior to traveling there, I could, pretend to be, for instance, wealthier than I am. I could pretend to be many different things. But then the problem is eventually one of two things happens. Either it spills out again, or the mask you wear ends up being welded to your face. I suspect it's the second thing that's happening to a lot of people today, that the masks they wear are being welded to their face.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. I see what you mean, because I have actually had this experience as well. Sometimes on a platform, you start being a certain person in a certain area, and that, like you said, Carl Benjamin, right? He starts off as just Sargon of Akkad being this thing, and it takes over his own life, and he
Mhm.
becomes more. And the dichotomy. I mean, Paul Vanderklay talks about this as well. Who he is, if you go to his church, um, you can have a discussion with him anytime you want, and you just knock on his office door. But on the internet, he's a celebrity.
Yeah, it is very strange. So I actually, on my Georgian channel here, I actually had one Georgian stop me on the street and going like, oh, you're the guy with that video channel, which was really strange to me because I think at that point I had like 20 or 30 followers on internet, and on YouTube. So yeah, it is a strange thing. I've just resigned myself to being myself in all circumstances, and that includes online. And it's not that I don't mind playing games. I don't mind acting when it's labeled as acting, you
Well,
know.
you're a puppeteer, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I just got asked to get something together for this international art show here in September. So I've got to come up with something. But
But
I don't mind acting
right.
as acting. Although it is very curious that the people are imitating themselves after, who they worship, are actors. And actors often, especially Hollywood actors, often have very little sense of self. They are often very much these people, why can they act, the best ones, why do they act so well? It's because they can disappear in the role. And why can they disappear in the role? Because they don't have that sense of self. They're not actors in the way, for instance, Humphrey Bogart was an actor. Whenever you watch a Humphrey Bogart movie, you're seeing Humphrey Bogart, variations on a theme. But many actors today will pride themselves on losing themselves in their role. So even a Leonardo DiCaprio, or somebody like that, they will lose themselves. But then the people out here watching those people will look at them and go, oh, I want to be like them. Who are they? And then those people also suddenly realize that they're famous and have a lot of money. But of course, they're also very worried about their position in the industry, which, one or two really badly done movies, one bad interview, you say the wrong thing. Oops, we discovered you wore blackface at a high school party. It's over. So they're all extremely insecure. There are very few really secure Hollywood actors.
Well, one of the greatest internet crimes is doxing. And what does
Yes,
doxing mean? It means letting people know who you are.
who you really are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people, I mean, that's terrifying to them. I use my real name. I've started using my real name on everything.
Hmm.
Because there is a real fear of being discovered at the
Right.
same time that you're being an exhibitionist.
Right.
I don't understand how those two interact. Being, putting everything, supposedly putting everything online and telling people what you eat every day or every meal, at the same time as being incredibly scared of somebody actually in real life um, coming up. Philip Franco mentioned somebody showed up at his business office,
Mm-hmm.
and he was freaked out. He's like, no, 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 you can't come to our offices. And I'm like, well, they didn't come to your home, they came to your business office.
Right. Right.
Why is that so disturbing to you? And I think the reason is because suddenly there's a physical person there that you
Yeah.
can't just get rid of, block, make go away the way that
Mm-hmm.
that we do online.
Right. Well, of course, it's also that problem of seeing behind the curtain and seeing the person when they're not presenting themselves. And like I say, if you meet me, I'm this, you know, which is to say, when I go cook or something, it's like, could you have an intellectual discussion with me? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are other aspects to my personality that don't necessarily, which is why I have more than one channel. But yeah, I'm this. I'm also really safe in the sense that I'm living in Georgia. Most people, if they ever came here, would just be so confused.
Right.
They couldn't even read the signs. That I'm not worried about somebody coming to my door or anything. So I feel great, And Georgians are really interesting people. They're not perfect, nobody is, but uh, they're they're very interested in. They're one of the few cultures that's xenophilic rather than xenophobic. I mean, they have their xenophobic aspects like all cultures do. But when they find out that you're from somewhere else, they're really curious, you know.
But
So
how did we get to a point where we no longer have this expectation that if we meet somebody, they're not going to punch us in the face? I,
yeah, well, I would say that's a 21st century thing. I mean, it was brewing, and that's where, in my How We Got Here series, I talk about the origins of the culture war. And, there's always been tensions politically, but something else started happening in the 70s, going into the 80s. And by the time we got to that knife edge election in the year 2000, by that time, after that, it was really hard. Although what's happened in the last 10 years has been this very bizarre development upon that. And what's really interesting to me is that it hasn't divided out exactly as it used to be. It used to be like born again Christians against, gay rights or something like this. We used to have these, the capitalists right wingers versus the more socialist left wingers or whatever. But it's not the same now. I mean, there are people being pushed all over the place, and I think a large part of it has been, well, there's probably a couple of major things. One has been the rise of this new cultish view of reality, which has taken over the left. And then you found Trump as a president. He had good points, but he also was, as far as someone who was a good communicator, he could make you laugh, but he could also make you really nervous if you didn't believe, if you were against him, everything he said would be like, oh my God, oh my God.
well,
So
he was
it created
trying
this
to trigger
tension.
people.
Hmm?
He was trying to trigger people. He was
Well,
trying to
exactly. Exactly.
emotionally get a response back from them.
Yeah. And like I say, not everything he did I was against by any means, nor was I for it. I think it was more complex than that. But what I do think is that those 4 years, this tension suddenly, it was there already. It was there. I've been working on How We Got Here, number 12, and I'm trying to determine when it started. It seems to have started after the Occupy Wall Street, and then started ramping up. But by 2014, you start getting the first videos and such coming out where, you have these really hysterical people, really, who are saying things that, it's just like, we need a safe space, and all of this kind of rhetoric, or hysteria, really. And
Have you read The Coddling of the American
yeah,
Mind?
yeah, I have it on my shelf here.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and
So what he
and
identifies is the coddling of children by older parents,
Mhm,
this culture of safetyism, not allowing
exactly.
children to do
The
anything.
one thing he doesn't discuss in there, which I think was probably just an oversight on his part, was the fact that near the end of the 90s, there were these books coming out. Like there was one called A Tribe Apart, a study of youth culture. Also books on cutting, people cutting themselves, younger women particularly, but men too, cutting themselves. There were these things happening. Um, and what it was that what had happened in the 90s morally had become so insane that, I mean, just the imagery, the way people thought, the way teenagers thought. I remember in my small town in Alaska, dealing with a couple of the younger students there, and who are like, say, 13, 14, 15. It's like, when did you have your first sexual encounter? When I was 11. That kind of thing. And that wasn't uncommon at all during the late 90s, early aughts. So I think what happened was, this kind of thing was so worrying to a certain kind of person that they started wanting. I mean, I could see this in the next generation of kids. Their parents were protecting them. They were picking them up from everything. They weren't letting them spend time alone with other children, except those they really trusted. And this is Alaska, where, basically you could be a free range child, and many of them were, but they would take them out of the schools and homeschool them. I think the homeschooling movement comes out of this. But I also think it's not just the homeschooling movement. It's also, tends to be predominantly right wing. I think it's also the left wing, saying like, this other stuff has gone too far. And so it was a combination of things. So I think right now, left and right wing children tend to all be both more immature than they used to be, more neotenous, to use the scientific word, where they retain the features of youth, and at the same time less motivated, less hope of having a job, more into video games, even though the kind of, some people say the great age of video games is pretty much over, but nevertheless, that doesn't mean there aren't, millions upon millions of geeks in America who are living that way. And so I don't know. I suspect that everything that Jonathan Haidt said in that is correct. I would just add, and there was the fear of what was happening to we'll say, the older brothers and sisters of this current group, or it's like it's about 5 years off, and if you go back to 2008, for instance, you'll see something very different. I mean, and now we've reached the point, but it was predictable. If you go back to the 19th and 18th century, the 18th century is known as being kind of a libertine generation, a libertine age. And while everyone was wearing those wigs and powdered wigs and such, their sexual morals were much, much looser than they would be in the next century. The Victorian age, the age of the bourgeois, was clamped down, much more so. So then we got to the 20th century, and then you started having people saying, oh, the sexual liberation. And it starts in the 1920s, undercurrents in the 19th century, then blossom in the 1920s. The Depression and the war kind of dampens it down. But by the 1960s, the whole thing is now completely overturned the repressions of the Victorian age.
So could
And
this just
now
be
we're,
natural oscillation?
I think it's partly that, but what isn't natural is the philosophy. That is to say, it isn't, what people are believing is far from natural.
Hmm.
It's the reason why. I mean, it was due to come, but it's the reason it's come that's so unusual and worrisome.
So
Especially the Gnostic elements that you see in the trans movement, that you see on Twitter, just online slugfest of people who, and if you were to meet these people in real life, chances are, well, these days I would say actually no, that chances are they would be just as nasty if they, I mean, now what's happened is what used to be a Twitter type phenomena has now spilled out onto the streets.
well, part of the problem is also a lot of people seem to think they know your motivations and be able to read behind what you really mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of secret knowledge,
Yeah.
mind reading, being able to predict the future, that's actually one thing that I've noticed among the neo-reactionaries. Like
Mm-hmm.
Mencius Moldbug, he's just sure he knows exactly how history is going to unfold. He knows exactly what's going to happen in 5, 10, 15 years. And so part of this Gnosticism seems to be having thinking you have a lot more information than you actually do.
Yeah, well, that's where all the conspiracy theories come into play. And the conspiracy theories are both on the left and the right. Everybody's operating on a conspiracy theory. But the right has a special place for them because their sense of power is dwindling. Therefore, you hold on to these things as a last lifeline. It's like, really, we know who's behind everything, whereas in my experience in life, we never know. And in fact, the people who supposedly do know don't know. Everything is always unfortunately, much sloppier and messier, and people can't handle that.
And there's
So,
accountability for being wrong.
right, right.
Yeah, the people who supposedly know can say all kinds of things, and then they're completely wrong. I was actually kind of surprised. Within Judaism, when you talk about prophecy, right? If somebody says something is a prophecy and it doesn't come true,
That's a false prophet.
that's you've just destroyed yourself, right?
Right,
You have lost all credibility, right?
right.
And for some reason, that just doesn't seem to exist anymore. Pundits who get things wrong, intellectuals who say things which turn out to be wrong, are, especially if they're just saying the same pablum and supposed common knowledge that everybody else is, there's no longer any accountability.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So that no one was responsible for all the endless garbage that was discussed about Russiagate. No one's responsible for that. Because if you were one of those people who believed, yes, the Russians are behind Trump, then it's like when it was, finally it's like, yeah, no, 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 nothing proves this. But no, no one knows what to know. If they're on your side, suddenly you develop amnesia about what happened a year ago.
That's part, amnesia is a really good word for it, because with the news cycle, I've noticed people are living, you know, on the day-to-day news cycle, but
Exactly.
very few of them remember anything that happened a year ago.
Right, right. Which is why, for me, on my channel, the thing I am most hoping that people take away from whatever it is they get from me is I hope they take away the idea that you should investigate history. You should investigate your own history. You should investigate the history of how did you and your family or whatever get to where you are physically. You should know these things. You should have some idea of what happened yesterday and the day before and the week before and the century before, you know, because it's without that we were marooned in time, which is in a sense what's happened in the world after modernism.
Well,
I don't know if we can.
that's kind of Gnostic as well, rewriting history.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one of the weird things about all the strange pseudepigrapha, both the Jewish and the Christian versions, is the Gnostics were great at having new canons. You know, so they would write books like the Acts of Thomas or the Gospel of Jude or whatever, and you know these things were done in such a way that, you know, it's like, oh no, this is the new revelation. We used to use the word a few times in the Jesus movement, truth junkies.
Mhm.
So whenever a new truth from the past was rediscovered, suddenly everyone would shift to that, you know, and that's kind of how people are today. It's like, you know, there's so many things that are just going to disappear from the last 10 years. No one really said that. Oh yes, they did. And then you can just show them, except the problem is there's such a cognitive dissonance that people won't believe it. And I think that is perhaps the most damaging thing and makes people so easily manipulable. So one of the problems with this whole, I want to be myself, I want to follow my dreams, I want to be, you know, a Disney princess, I want to, you know, do whatever it is I want to do, I want to be free, I want to be myself. The problem with that is the people who sell us stuff, the people in charge of stuff, know exactly how to sell you stuff just to be yourself. They know. And they also know how to program the algorithms to sell you more of that stuff. They know how to manipulate you. And more, the political systems are figuring out the same thing. That's why there is such a divide now, is that people are just pickled in their own beliefs. You know, they're pickled in what they already think. But the point is they're pickled and they're manipulated.
That's part of what really bothers me about the all of the contradictions is when you look at people who they at the same time will believe they have a very strong identity, um, while being completely swayable and lost into the mob, um, and and yeah, they're disembodied. I
Mhm.
think maybe the real problem here is being disembodied, being because um like there's also that NPC meme that these people are just they're repeating things without thinking it, and it's it's like a spell or an incantation.
When back in the early 90s, I started working at this one independent record store. But what I really started doing was I realized that there was a lot of albums being slaughtered off by different small companies and larger companies in New York City. So I said, well, I know what I want, because I know there are still people who want phonograph records. So I'm going to go and buy some of this stuff, and then I'm going to resell it at higher prices. So, and then I also bought and sold people's record collections. So about 15 hours a week, I would be in this one store where people could find me to bring me stuff. And here's what I saw. I saw people would bring me their record collection. And then I would say, so why are you getting rid of your record collection? And they would say, because I want to collect CDs now. But I knew they weren't going to buy all these albums over again. But then I had a question in my mind. Why did these not mean anything to you when you bought them? Do they mean anything to you now? What is your identity in relationship to these things? What are you? There are memories associated with these, I'm assuming, just as there are memories associated with the much music I've collected in my life. But you know, these people weren't like me. They weren't serious collectors and trying to investigate the meaning of music. But nevertheless, you know, you look at the records they're selling and they're saying, these must have meant something to you. So What do they mean now? Who are you now? You're wanting to go with the new people. You know, you want to be someone who collects CDs now, whatever that means, you know. And from there, we've moved on to format after format so that the music no longer really matters. What matters are the formats.
Hmm.
What matters is the new app on your phone. You know, that's what matters to people. It matters their, you know, connectivity, their accessibility, you know. Only here, though. This is the reality on the phone. This meat bag walking around doesn't mean as much as it used to, except where they can turn their image into an Instagrammable moment, you know. And I think that is true wherever I've seen it. I mean, in Georgia, the same thing is happening as in America. It's happening later, but it's still happening.
Do people dance less when you become more Gnostic, become more disembodied? Do you think maybe dancing is an important
Well, the earlier forms of Gnosticism, which I would include, like I talked about the group, the Christi, the Whippers, they certainly would dance. The Shakers were kind of a Gnostic variation on Quakerism, and Quakerism itself is kind of like got some issues connected to it. But Shakers are really, and they also did not believe in procreation, but they did believe in dancing. And I think what I see now is I see people who believe more and more. What's happening is people don't, I mean, and this is apart from the times, people are more and more staying at home, which is really bizarre. And their homes are boring. I mean, their homes aren't like my home. Most people say if they were stuck in my home, they could eat all winter and they could find endless books to read, things to listen to, movies to watch, whatever, because I believe in exploring things and always being open and not shutting down. And I use my body. Well, for one thing, I walk up and down thousands of feet. I live on the side of a mountain in the middle of the city. But, you know, 2 weeks ago, I did a video on this for my Georgian Crossroads channel where I spent 6 hours hiking in the town above the town. So it was a very few cities in the world that are large, you know, over a million, about 1.5 million people here. And yet I can walk out of the town and hike on above the city, you know, 3,000 feet. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
the Sufis
but here's,
had their whirling dervishes. So
yes. So it used to be, but the reason for those dances is what's important. The reason for those dances in those older cults and older movements was to achieve an altered state.
I see.
Because if you spin, and most of those dances include spinning or dancing in circles for a while. If you do that, you know, it's just like as a child, you spin and spin and spin in a circle, and after a while you're like, whoa, and it's kind of fun as a child. If you do it as an adult, you start experiencing some other stuff, and some of that's not very pleasant. But the point is, it's a way to achieve an altered state fairly predictably, fairly fast. And like, for instance, the rhythm of the whirling dervishes is slow and repetitious. It's not that fast thing that'll put you, but slowly, so that you leave, in a sense, you leave your body. That's what the altered state does. So, but no, thinking about physicality, one of the things I've realized is that as much as I appreciate the ability I have right now to communicate with people through this medium, I know very little will change in this world until people rediscover real congenial social connections. You know, that is to say, until they have dinners together, until they can sing together again, until they can do the things. This is what Owen Barfield means by final participation. Many of these things, and he talks about final participation in the old pagan sense. And, you know, where people would see the spirits in the trees and this and that. But among the things people in the past used to do naturally is, for instance, sing while they work. Very few people do that anymore, you know, because, well, for one thing, while you're working, you've got your iTunes going, you know, and it's kind of an answer to that question. But the thing is, I think one of the reasons I came to Georgia is because while Georgia, again, is being infected by the same technology and ideologies, it is not yet at all postmodern, which is really great. You don't meet people here who look at everything ironically.
Right.
You just don't find that here, which means a friend of mine was telling me about the Georgians have this ritual meal called the supra. Now, some of them can be kind of sloppy supra, some of them very formal and ritualistic. And they involve a lot of toasting, a lot of poetry, drinking wine, singing, all sorts of things. This is how the Georgians kind of keep their soul. So a friend of mine brought a couple of Brits with him. He's an American. He brought a couple of Brits with him to a supra. And in England, it's just par for the course that you use your toasting to put other people down or to put yourself down, to make ironic, witty comments. This did not go over at all well, because like in the supra I've been to, one of them, the toast would go around. Now it's your turn to make a toast. Now I figured out very quickly you have to do it from your heart, your guli, and if you don't, it doesn't matter. You have to do it from your heart. So I did, and I said, I hope Georgia doesn't lose its soul with all the modern things. And one older man came up to me afterwards, and he says, like, yes, and this was not like sentimentality or anything. It was really a deep felt thing. People here have had a civil war in the last, back in the 90s. They've been without electricity. They had a 5-day war with Russia in 2008. This particular period in time is nothing to them. They don't break their stride. It's like, yeah, we've been through a lot worse more recently. So, what is this? But they speak from their hearts especially in that situation. And these two British guys, unfortunately, just kept making jokes and stuff. And this was really offensive to them. So that whole ironic, postmodern take of, or the kind of way people are always talking about how, that guy's like Thanos in the Marvel MCU or something like this. That kind of conversation, even among the younger people here, doesn't go anywhere. They don't compare themselves. I mean, yeah, they have the big Marvel movies here. They have Star Wars. They have the video games. But nobody seems to live for this stuff. Nobody inhabits those worlds. I have not yet met one Georgian student who was a geek in the American sense of the word.
Is there as much opportunity to be online in, with Georgian web and media and all that? Is there enough content?
Yeah. They have the internet. They have phones. Everybody's got a phone, it seems. So yeah, but here's the big difference, is that they also all have their families. And this is a huge difference, because we are so atomized in the West. And that atomization leads to mental instability. I remember being in New York City, living by myself alone in an apartment. I could feel the tensions just kind of like, my relationship with my mother was kind of odd. And I could feel the tensions because my mother was back in California. I was in New York City alone. Your friends come and go in New York, except for the hardcore New Yorkers who live out in the boroughs. But I remember this moment very specifically here when I was standing at the metro waiting for it to come. And, there's that zone right next to where it's going to come, where there's usually some sort of marker to say, don't get too close. Well, I was standing over that zone and the train was coming, and I was just kind of looking down the tracks. And then suddenly my New York mode clicked into gear. And I said, I wonder what if, someone pushes me in, because in New York City, that's a real threat. And there's always some nut or somebody who's really mad, or maybe they're going to jump in. Who knows? That kind of thing happens all the time. So I suddenly turned and looked at all the people on the platform with me. And I looked at them all, and I looked in their faces. And I said, none of these people are going to do that. And then I started thinking about the streets. I'd seen plenty of I wouldn't call them homeless people. I'd call them beggars, often old women who are collecting a little bit of extra money for their families, and they just sit on the streets, and they were really poor. But I think in the entire 2+ years I've been here, I've seen maybe 3 truly crazy people on the street, you know? Whereas in New York City, that would just be a walk around the block, you know? So, and I suddenly said to myself when I was standing in the metro, I wonder why none of these people here seem, like what is different? They're living in a big city. And in fact, the nature of the city is, I have a friend, she's like pretty short, very petite, very pretty. She can walk through the darkest parts of town at 2 o'clock in the morning to walk home to save money for a taxi because the metro isn't working without worrying at all. And I'm going like, what is it here? And then I suddenly realized everybody knows where their family is. Everybody knows their grandparents. Everybody knows who they're related to. They know the people back in the village where their ancestors come from. And there's something about that. And Georgians, the concept of privacy in terms of physical privacy does not really exist that much to most Georgians. So, you're always sharing rooms with people. And that kind of keeps you, kind of sane. I mean, Georgians have problems, don't get me wrong. But they don't have those kind of problems brought on by modernism, technology. They don't have all the physical. I mean, there are people here who want to be like what they see as images in New York City or Berlin or Paris or something. And whenever I talk to them, I start telling them, well, let me show you what's actually going on in America with this thing or that thing. And they get horrified going, oh, that's too much. It's like the left-wing people here go like, oh, no, we don't want that.
Well, one thing I've noticed, so I'm an insurance broker, and one thing I've noticed is I have many clients who are getting into their 60s and 70s and 80s, and they have no spouse, no children, no family, nobody. And I mean, one particular client of mine was diagnosed with dementia, and the question was, what do you
Who
do
do we
now,
talk to? Yeah.
right? Who's going to take care of you? And while you might have friends, very few friends are going to actually take care of you into something like that. And if you don't have the strong, unbreakable relationships, and relationships today seem to be so fragile. People who have been friends for decades will suddenly stop talking to each other. They friend each other. It's weird.
It is. And I have had friends in the last year stop communicating with me because this whole political thing, I didn't say the right thing somewhere and it was over, and and that's been growing as a trend throughout the last 10 years or so, where people, I mean, one of the reasons I came here to Georgia, to Tbilisi, is because they're not like that here. They even though I have no real physical relatives left except some distant cousins, but who I've never been super close to back in the States. But when it comes to people here, it's not, again, don't get me saying idealistic things. But at the same time, for instance, I've got one friend who's young. She's around 30 years old. She just says, don't worry, Byrne. If anything happens, we'll be there for you, which is an astonishing thing to say, to someone who is there in your country from another country, and it's an interesting thing for me.
Well,
I feel at home here, while at the same time, I also always feel like an outsider.
Well, I've seriously been thinking about moving out of Los Angeles because I see all the problems you talk about, right? and all the
And
reasons.
LA is really mutated.
But you know, I bruised a rib a few months ago, and I couldn't do anything. And I called my mom, and she comes, and you know, she, you know, yes, I'm a grown man, but with a bruised rib, I could not move. And
Sure, sure.
you know, having people who you can depend on to help you in the small things, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Because one thing I've been telling people is individual human beings are not viable living organisms. You
No,
cannot live
we
a
also go crazy when we're alone.
solitary confinement is the worst punishment you can give someone.
Yeah, yeah.
And we keep on thinking that no, we can be alone, and it's like no, you can't. Human beings cannot be alone, and we cannot live alone, and we need to stop thinking. Uh, it's it's weird. We've both lost our individuality and identities and respect for each other at the same time where we've lost all our connections with other people that are, you know, permanent. And divorce is actually part of this too. You know, marriage has become less permanent.
Mhm, mhm. Well, in my series on time, I talk about how one of the most serious problems is that we've a notion of how it is to live within time. Therefore, for instance, when you talk about love, the most difficult aspect for most people in like is to commit their time, to say, I will be there in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because we don't know how to do that. And one of the things that attracted me to Georgia, there's an old man here who's about 80 years old. He's one of the puppeteers I know, and he doesn't speak English, but you know, I was talking with him through a friend, and I said, well, you know, I think friendship is very important in Georgia. And he pulls out a set of keys, and he says to me, "You see these keys? These are the keys of my friend who I've had since I was, you know, 5 years old, and I feel like going all the way home. I can go ahead to his house right now, open the door, and go to sleep there."
Right. Yeah.
And it's just like for an American, that would be almost impossible to imagine. I mean, it is for me.
I used to do that when I was in high school. I had a friend whose house was open like that,
Yeah.
and yeah, you could go. It
Well,
actually happened.
part of it is we are socialized in America to be alone. You know, so much of our lives are to get us out of the house. But now, when a certain amount of kids are staying in the house, they aren't necessarily a part of the house. They're more a part of their computer video complex.
Right.
You know, so but part of the reason I'm here is to look for secrets, not secrets as in secret knowledges, but things that Georgians have kept going that while they're not directly applicable back to my home country, some of them might provide some clues, like the whole thing of the idea of the family. You know, it's just like when I saw that, I said, like, yes, that is an important thing to understand. That's why there's not a lot of crazy people in this big city.
Are you guys locked down right now with Corona?
Yeah. Mhm.
Because yeah, one of the
But
things I was
we
thinking,
can eat in restaurants, and we can walk around. People are wearing masks. We have a 9 o'clock curfew, which is probably good because Georgians tend to party long into the night. So, and get together in doing so, you know, which spreads it more. So, yeah, but it's been strange. We've come in and out of it. We were in it. The first one was really quiet. I did a whole series on the lockdowns and curfews here on my Georgian Crossroads channel, and then it kind of opened up again in the summer, and then it came back again with a vengeance, and now everyone's worrying about the next wave of it and such. So, but you know, my feeling is if you're grounded, if you're grounded, to me, to be grounded is to know who you are and to know your history. And for me, it's to know there is a God, and that God is personal, not in the sense that I'm personal, but certainly not less than me. God is not like, an intelligent rock or something. God is more personal than I am. To know that, and also one of the things I've discovered in life is that, the materialists would say that, the hardcore thing at the bottom of everything is the atoms or the subatomic particles. Whereas my feeling is, no, the hardcore thing at the bottom of everything is the relationship of those things. You see, it's what makes them hold together. Or as it's said in certain places, in communications theory now, the idea is the thing comes from bit, the knowledge, so that we come from DNA inside of us. Everything is assembled through DNA. But then that presupposes a code. That presupposes a logos, and so I think that knowing that for me, I know that the foundation of everything is relationships. It's our relationship to nature, it's our relationship to each other, it's our relationship to our stuff. And when those things are wrong, as in pollution, as in, atomization of human contacts, as in putting too much technology between each other, then we have to go back and do what we can. I mean, we're not going to, it's just like I would like to say, yeah, just go live without all this stuff. It's probably not going to happen. So you have to learn with it, which means you have to learn what you can live without and how to keep. I'm really glad right now I have people I can talk to here, because, we talk about a community, Paul Vanderklay's community and stuff. Well, that's nice. And there is an aspect to of that, which is kind of a community. But in fact, nobody's here. If anything happens to me in the middle of the night here, nobody's here. Paul Vanderklay isn't going to get in touch with me in a couple hours. If, anything happens, they might be able to send me some money, but that's just stuff. And what you need is human relationship. And that I do have here. I mean, the other day I had this bad case of food poisoning. I call up a friend and I said, yeah, this is really bad. And they said, why didn't you call me? And I was just like, most Americans would not have said that to me in that kind of, she was just like, oh, why didn't you call? And that's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to know that someone's worried about you, and cares about you even when you're not around, So
Well, part of sharing a meal, right, and being there with other people, like, so the mass, right, it's a meal, which
mhm,
is, in Judaism, we have Kiddush, right?
yes,
And being there with people so maybe that's the cure to this Gnosticism, is actually physically being there, and like having. Part of the problem is that the churches are either mega churches where you're anonymous,
yeah, it
or
doesn't help.
you're not going at all, right? um, the Dunbar number comes up a lot in this.
What's
What's
that?
So the Dunbar number is supposed to be the maximum number of people that you can actually maintain a relationship with in your
Right.
mind, right? And there are various ways. I think the number usually given, which is around 200, is way too small. Uh, we have names and other primates don't. It was
Mhm,
derived from um, looking at how large primate tribes
mhm,
are
right.
in relation to their brain size. And so they extrapolated that human would be something like 200.
Right.
And I think it's very different because we have names, but um, there is such a number. There is a
There is a limit.
yeah,
Yeah.
maximum number of people you can know and have relationships with.
Well, here's one of the things I learned moving from New York City to a small Alaskan town of 2,500 people. And that is, the fewer people that are around, the larger you are. And what I mean by that is that your place, you occupy more of a place within that sphere. The more people, the more you're just this small person walking among the
Byrne.
famous celebrities, uh, sports people, news people, things like that would be the people who are on the top, rich people. Uh, those people can then say, I'm big. But the truth is, most people, the only way you can get a sense of self is to then be in a smaller group. And unfortunately, many of the neighborhoods in New York City have been atomized as well. So, and it was, it's a truism that you rarely know your neighbors in a building. It's a truism that, there's all these people you see on the street, but you rarely connect with them. I lived, fortunately, in New York City in the East Village for a lot of time, and also in Soho for a while. And I was fortunate that if I walked like 10 blocks someplace, I would almost always bump into someone I knew. And those kinds of relationships are very important to yourself, because you need to feel like you're somebody to somebody else. And that's the problem, is many people are saying, I define myself. You can't define yourself. I am very sure, Walker Percy says something very interesting in his book, Lost in the Cosmos. He says, how is it you can look at someone else and understand who they are, and they can't see themselves? When people have tried to tell me something about my character, even when they've done it in the wrong way, there's usually a reason for it. And I do well to listen and to try to figure out, how come I'm not getting along with this person? What is this person trying to say to me? Why do people keep telling me I have this problem or that problem?
Well, part of the problem there is we have this culture now where online there's tons and tons of criticism that's only criticism. Like, so one of the things my clients constantly tell me is they go to look for a good doctor. And if you go to the doctor's ratings on Yelp or whatever, it's only complaints. Nobody ever goes to give a doctor a good rating on Yelp. But
Right.
when there's a problem, so yes, but part of the problem we have taking criticism is there's so much criticism coming at us that it's also distorting.
Oh, yeah. Well, the criticism online is particularly devious because it does not include the human face and the human presence. So you can say anything, especially if you've got a name that's just simply an avatar, or a presence that's avatarish. It's like you have license to say whatever you want, and no one. And I try, whenever I interact with people on the internet, to always be myself, to never take their bait, because there are those people, and I've had people on my channel, I've had people responding with certain kinds of things, and I just go like, okay, they're wanting, or maybe I've left a comment that I thought was rather thoughtful or sometimes funny or whatever, but someone else will come along, they're just wanting to rip into it, or maybe they do. And if they do, I still don't take the bait. I'll go ahead. Evidently you've got problems, so go ahead, get it out of your system. I'm going to reply to you as if I was talking to you face to face.
Is part of the problem that people have lost their sense of humor to some extent? People no longer understand when something is a joke.
Well, yeah, particularly on the left, but also there are crazies on the right too. And especially if you're hitting someone's pet subject, I remember telling people, it used to be that, I remember in my lifetime having great arguments with people. Then I remember sometime in the mid 80s, that kind of phased out. And it happened less and less with only select people. And then, but it would be about, and also like people would go to try to find someone to marry. And it used to be like, okay, we're both Protestants from this denomination. Then later it became things like, okay, you're Protestant and I'm Catholic. ooh, that's big. And then later it became, oh, you're a Christian and I'm a Jew. And then later it became, you know, well, you don't believe in anything and I kind of believe in something. And then after a while, it started to be things like, oh, you listen to the Sex Pistols and I listen to the Clash. And then it kept evolving online to, you know, what do you mean you don't like this movie that I like? It's like as enough of a reason to slag a person's whole life off as being something, you know, it's just like, I would much rather spend like 25 minutes, 25 days talking to a Satanist than I would talk to people that shallow, you know? So it's, yeah. But my feeling is, yeah, I don't care about all of this. That is to say, I don't care. If you want to try to rile me up, go ahead. You don't know me well enough to do that, you know? And if I take your bait, I'm just being a fool. So I'm not going to take your bait. I don't feel like being a fool. So I'm going to try to apply some sort of sense of compassion and wisdom to the degree I can, which, you know, it isn't always possible.
Right. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, we should probably start wrapping this up.
Yeah, I could do this forever, but what I was hoping we might be able to get is some sort of agreement about things specifically that we find um, wrong and condemnable about Gnosticism, so that we aren't just using it as a pejorative. So it's not just, some sort of genetic fallacy where you say, oh, well, if this derives from Gnosticism, then there
Yeah,
must.
we don't want to turn it into a word like fascist.
Yes. And well, I think this is part of the problem. It's like words no longer have meanings, and we.
It goes with the people speaking them. It used to be that when a person spoke their word was their self, their bond. The Chinese tell a story of two men who were talking to each other. And one said, meet me under the bridge, I will be there. And so the man says, I will meet you under the bridge. So he goes under the bridge, and then there's a huge storm, and the man stays there and stays there, but eventually the water level rises so high that he drowns. Now, when the Chinese tell this story, they think that the man who waited was the honorable man. Whereas in America, we would say he's insane because we no longer put our words behind our self behind our words. And so it goes with having no identity. It also means your words kind of go with that. They're also very loose and flexible.
Well, I got into an argument with someone, and he kept on saying, well, how do you define that? And my answer was, no, no, no. The word has a definition. I'm using it precisely as how that word is used.
Right.
It's not my definition. It's not something I can change. And so, right, people, I mean, it would be nice if there was a sort of, well, this is part of the problem with fascists as well, is when you look up the definition of fascist, it is amorphous, right? A
Mhm.
lot of times when people say fascist, they actually mean either collectivist, or they mean having to do with authoritarianism, or having to do with a cult of personality, right?
Mhm.
So what are the things we actually mean when we say something is Gnostic? Um, yeah.
Well, here's how I understand it. First, there has to be a very serious matter spirit split. But the matter spirit split by itself is not enough to call something Gnostic. It can have Gnostic aspects. But so, for instance, I would never call Plato's philosophy Gnostic, nor would I call certain very symbolic ideas Gnostic. The problem comes when you now start saying that what is spiritual cannot touch what is matter. So that for instance, a contemporary way of understanding this, I talked about existentialism. Existentialism is like the ground evil layer of matter minus all that spiritual stuff. But I think it was Francis Schaeffer used the term the existential methodology. And the existential methodology is like this. I don't believe anything has any specific meaning. All that's left is my choices from day to day, which lead me to despair. Reason leads to despair. So, nevertheless, I think we all should try to really to make everyone equal and to feel better, which is, so what that would mean is, really, I don't think there's any meaning. So I cannot derive my meaning from this, from matter, from it, the things. So I just leap out of it and go upstairs, so to speak, to pick out some random or not so random, borrow them from Christianity or Judaism or anything upstairs, and then bring them and say, but really, this is how communism often works, is it has all these wonderful virtues of, of collectivization and working together and all of this, but in reality, they're down there with, the nitty gritty of, the 5-year plan, and nobody really believes that anymore and stuff. But up here, there's all these ideals. Well, that's kind of a Gnostic split right there. And where we are now, where, it's like people don't understand anything about this material world that operates in time. Nevertheless, they have all of these things that are up here. So maybe it's their identities, and the word identities gets thrown around. Like you have multiple identities, not in the sense of I'm a child to my mother. I'm say a friend to you. These kinds of identities. But identities and like I'm deerkin and I'm LGBT and I'm all these different things. So, but they're pulling that out of thin air. I mean, because really what they believe doesn't give them any ground for it. Because really they're often materialists who still believe in this junk. It's like, it really doesn't matter what you say or what you do or whatever. However, we should all, it's just like, and that to me is the Gnostic split. And so it's searching for meaning I think the modern variant is searching for meaning, even though you have no reason in your philosophical outlook for having it. So everything's absurd, and yet you think everybody should, follow your social justice philosophy, which you borrowed from a variation on the Jewish and Christian ideas.
Is the problem the split or the clash between?
Yeah, it's the split, but it's also wanting to get into higher levels in different sorts of ways. And it's also despising what's at the bottom. So this was the whole problem with the Aryans and the Jews, because they had swallowed this idea, this caste idea from Blavatsky. And in fact, they had a whole system of really proto-New Age ideas that the Germans have. Nicholas Goodrich Clark's occult, the occult philosophy behind Nazism, the occult roots of Nazism, is really good at this point. And there were things also like the Lebensborn, and which was really a back to the land movement. People, I remember when I was young, used to joke about Himmler being like a chicken farmer. Well, yeah, he was a chicken farmer the same way that hippies were chicken farmers and such back in the 1970s. That is to say, it was a philosophical idea. And they were also into nudism as a philosophical idea. And all of these things were kind of bubbling around at the beginning of the 20th century in the Germanic realms. And the Gnostic split comes with, there's the hardcore realities of power and all of this, but what we believe is that the earth, it's just like the Aryan nations call the Jews the mud people. They're like too far. They're like just dirt stuff, and they're bad because they're going to. This is where the whole idea of seduction, Jewish seduction, to bring you down to their level comes to. And I thought Bruno Schoat's discussion of that was really good, and I'd like to hear another couple of hours more of that, because I thought he really was on to some interesting ideas there. Things I've thought about for a long time because I've read a lot of this material. And it comes with the split, and then the split of despising the lower, thinking that God couldn't have anything to do with this stuff. And yet in the beginning, God created the earth and saw that it was good. And
Well,
it is still good.
they believe that it was a demiurge that created the physical.
That's the point. That God, the real God couldn't get involved with this mucky stuff. This was the creation of some lower being who basically, it's kind of, I guess he was trying to make his bones or something, to put it in mafia terms.
So there's a polytheism there, actually, that's actually also, I would say, a part of the problem.
Kinda, yeah, kinda. But it's different than, say, the polytheism of the Greeks or the Hindus. Although I'd have to look more into Hindu. Well, I'm just going to say that it's different. But yeah, it is this very strange thing, and yet it's amazing how many different variations there were of it and are, and how often the split shows up. And it's the split. I mean, you really see this in the Matrix, but you see it in Star Wars too.
There's also a split between the real knowledge and the, I guess, fake knowledge, you would say, which is what your senses tell you, right?
Yeah, and so that if you take that too far, but you can, and it sometimes does happen, then all the abstraction of science can be seen as this kind of almost Gnostic thing. Now, I wouldn't want to take that too far, because I really do believe in science. And good science deals with the stuff too. But I do know this, and I've been told by my biologist friends who, not the biologists who work in the labs, but the biologists who are out in the field studying the actual animals, they're looked at as practically being occultists by the scientists who have the spiritual abstractions. So they understand genetics, they understand molecules. Whereas these people out there looking at bears and turtles, they're like, what do they understand? Whereas in fact, it is the bear and the turtle. And I have a friend who studies each of those things, who, if you want to understand it, you have to spend time with the thing and develop a relationship to it. And that's where science has taken a strange turn, because I think the original science of the up until probably the middle of the 18th century was much more fascinated and in love with the stuff of reality. They were just like, wow, look at these things. Where eventually it becomes more and more this reduction of things. Now, I will say this, however, the physicists seem to have kept an eye on what was important. And so they have realized, oh, time is really important. They have also realized that in the state of things, two things cannot be in the same place at the same time. Therefore, difference is real. In chaos theory, we cannot understand everything. Richard Feynman used to take planes up into the sky and look at clouds and try to understand why they were all the same and why they were all different. And it's a very complex thing to do. But that kind of science, I have all the respect in the world for, because you're asking the questions, you're dealing with the stuff, and ultimately it's not about simply the abstractions, it's about what's there.
So I was actually going to bring physics up as another example of this split, because I don't know if you've been following Eric Weinstein at all, but
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, so apparently string theory is fighting against the idea that they need a falsifiable, and apparently there has started being some sort of split in physics.
Yeah, string theory is very, very weird. And it also posits those other dimensions in almost Gnostic form.
Well, the
So,
yeah, the multiverse, right? Okay.
exactly.
I am going to let you go because I could do this really for the rest.
Well, in a few months, we'll do it again sometime.
Definitely.
Yeah, I am going to be on Paul Vanderklay's channel at the end of the month sometime. So,
Well, expect a torrent of invitations, because when people found out you're willing to talk to somebody like me, they, they've there's a lot of excitement that you might be willing to talk to them. So
right.
I do expect you to get quite a few invitations
That's
from
fine.
everybody.
I mean, as long as they don't get too much in the way of the what I'm trying to do. So, I am trying to finish up by the end of the month my entire How We Got Here series, which is 2 more episodes, and then I'm going to start another one on tourism and reality, which I think when you just hear it, you're going like, what's he talking about? But if you heard the Hans Ruckmacher lecture, the part where he talks about vacations at the beginning, just imagine me just going to town on that and then bringing in a lot of personal experience. So
I'll just say, while I haven't gone through your whole Oprah,
that's all right.
I love listening to you talk about music.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people want to hear me do that because that's actually my specialty. But what I'm waiting to do is to get my library here. And so I'm going to do some sort of crowdfunder, I hope very soon, to try to get enough money to get my library here. But it weighs over 10,000 pounds. So
that's yeah, that's going to be difficult. Okay.
Yes, it is. It is. It's a Herculean task, but I think I hope I've built up enough goodwill out there that I can get a bit of help. I kind of crash landed when I got here. There were promises of various financial resources that didn't come through. And fortunately, I was just old enough to be able to get some retirement money. And even though it wasn't a lot, it's enough to coast here pretty nicely. But it isn't enough to get, I could wait about 5 years or so and maybe get my stuff here. The main problem is having a here to bring it to, and I don't want to bring it to this particular apartment. So you'll find out when I do the crowdfunder.
Well, so. I cannot recommend his channels. You have 3 of them. I will be linking those in the description. And thank you so much. And
I also have for more ideas, I have the Anadromist Life, which has a lot of essays on it. So
just really quickly, I love the idea of swimming upstream. I had to look that word up.
Well, it came from working in Alaska in nature, and my friends who are biologists and lecturers and stuff would often use that word, and I liked it. And they would talk about the anadromous life of the salmon, and the salmon, it's born in a small clear water stream, and then it goes out into this big muddy silty river, then swims out into the ocean. Some of them swim as far as from Alaska to Japan, do something out there, I don't know what, and then turn around and come back, and then they swim upstream, and then they mate once and die as they're leaving their eggs behind. And I thought, like, that's a pretty cool analogy. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll stop recording now.
Okay. Take care, and